In the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on a journey into the remote Ural Mountains of Russia. They were young, skilled, and well-prepared for one of the harshest environments on Earth. But weeks later, something terrifying was discovered. Their tent had been ripped open from the inside. Their belongings were still neatly inside: boots, coats, equipment. Yet the hikers had fled into the freezing night, barefoot. What could possibly frighten trained explorers enough to run into a deadly snowstorm with no protection? Even today, more than 60 years later, the mystery of what happened on that mountain remains unsolved. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The expedition was led by a 23-year-old university student named Igor Dyatlov. He and his group were experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Most of them were in their early 20s. They had trained for extreme winter conditions and were attempting to earn a difficult hiking certification that required navigating dangerous terrain. Their destination was a mountain known as Autorten, deep within the northern Ural range. The journey would be long and exhausting, crossing frozen forests, open mountain slopes, and brutal winter winds. But the group was confident. They had the equipment, the knowledge, and the determination to succeed. On January 23, 1959, the team began their expedition. None of them could have imagined what was waiting for them in the mountains. For several days, the hikers pushed deeper into the wilderness. The temperature dropped far below freezing. Snow covered the landscape in every direction. Towering mountains and endless forests made the region feel completely isolated from the rest of the world. The hikers kept journals and took photographs during the journey. In these photos, they appeared cheerful and relaxed. They joked with one another, posed for pictures, and continued toward their destination. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the weather began to worsen. Strong winds howled across the slopes, and visibility grew worse with each passing day. Still, the group pressed on. On February 1st, they set up camp on the side of a mountain. It would be their final night alive. That night, something happened. Exactly what occurred inside the tent remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. At some point during the night, the hikers suddenly cut their way out of the tent from the inside. They didn't use the entrance. They sliced through the fabric and escaped directly into the freezing darkness. What makes this even stranger is that they left behind almost everything: warm clothing, boots, supplies that could have saved their lives. Instead, they ran down the mountainside into a violent snowstorm. The temperature that night may have dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. In those conditions, survival without proper clothing is nearly impossible. Something must have terrified them beyond reason. When the hikers failed to return on schedule, search teams were sent into the mountains. After days of searching, rescuers finally discovered the abandoned campsite. The tent was partially buried in snow, and just as feared, it had been cut open from the inside. Footprints led away from the tent, descending down the mountain slope. Even more disturbing was what those footprints revealed. Some of them appeared to have been made by people without shoes. Following the trail, search teams eventually discovered the first bodies. 2 hikers were found near the edge of a forest beneath a large cedar tree. They were barefoot and wearing only minimal clothing. A small fire had been started nearby, suggesting they had desperately tried to survive the freezing night, but it hadn't been enough. As the search continued, more bodies were discovered across the mountainside. Some were found closer to the tent, as if they had attempted to return. Others were located much farther away. But what shocked investigators the most were the unusual conditions of some of the victims. Several of the hikers had suffered severe internal injuries. These injuries were powerful enough to break bones, yet strangely there were few external wounds. Experts compared the force of these injuries to the impact of a car crash, but there had been no vehicles and no evidence of violence. Some victims were missing pieces of clothing, suggesting that others may have taken them in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Every new discovery raised more questions, and almost none of them had clear answers. Over the years, investigators and researchers have proposed many different explanations for what happened on that mountain. One theory suggests that the hikers fled their tent because of an avalanche. The idea is that they feared the snow would collapse and bury them alive. But this explanation has problems. The slope where the tent was found was relatively shallow, and investigators found no strong evidence of a major avalanche. Another theory involves infrasound. Under certain conditions, powerful winds moving across mountain slopes can create low-frequency sound waves. These sounds cannot always be heard, but they can cause intense fear or panic in humans. Some scientists believe this phenomenon may have triggered a sudden wave of terror among the hikers. There are also more mysterious theories. Some witnesses reported seeing strange glowing lights in the sky around the same time as the incident. This led to speculation about secret military tests or unidentified flying objects. However, no solid evidence has ever confirmed these ideas. Even after decades of investigation, the truth remains unclear. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most disturbing and puzzling events in modern history. 9 skilled hikers entered the mountains. None of them returned. Their final moments were filled with fear, confusion, and desperation. Yet, despite countless investigations and theories, no explanation fully accounts for all the strange details. The mountains of the Ural region still hold their secrets, and somewhere in the freezing darkness of that winter night, something happened that drove 9 experienced explorers to flee into the storm. What it was, we may never truly know.